July 11, 1943. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring was convinced the battle for Sicily would be decided before noon. American troops were pinned against the beaches of Gela, their backs to the Mediterranean. They were still unloading equipment, still organizing defenses, still vulnerable. German military doctrine had predicted this moment for decades. Amphibious invasions were weakest in their first hours, before artillery and armor could be brought ashore. Kesselring believed he had timed his counterattack perfectly. At dawn, German armor would strike. By midday, the Allies would be forced back into the sea, and Sicily would be saved. Kesselring believed he was facing a conventional army. Infantry, light armor, limited artillery. He expected tanks and air power to decide the outcome, as they always had. What he did not realize was that the Americans had changed the nature of amphibious warfare itself. At 57 years old, Albert Kesselring was one of Germany's most experienced commanders. A veteran of the First World War, he had risen through the Luftwaffe and commanded air fleets during the Battle of Britain in 1940. He had overseen the bombardment of Malta and coordinated Axis operations across the Mediterranean. More than anything else, Kesselring understood logistics and industrial power. He knew how modern war was sustained, how armies moved, and how resources were concentrated at decisive points. These were not abstract theories. They were principles he had practiced for over 30 years. That is why the intelligence reports arriving at his headquarters in Frascati were so unsettling. Allied convoys crossing the Mediterranean were expected, but the numbers appeared impossible. 3,200 ships. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, landing ships, hospital vessels. The largest amphibious fleet ever assembled. Above them, 4,000 aircraft stood ready to dominate the skies over Sicily. In the first wave alone, 180,000 soldiers prepared to land. American, British, and Canadian forces equipped with tanks, artillery, and enough ammunition to fight for weeks without resupply. In Kesselring's entire career, he had never seen anything like it. Not even the German invasion of France in 1940 had employed resources on this scale. Still, doctrine offered hope. If German armor struck quickly, before the beachheads consolidated, even an invasion of this size could fail. The key was speed. The landing had begun during the night of July 9th. Paratroopers dropped across southeastern Sicily under cover of darkness, but high winds scattered them. Some drowned at sea. Others landed kilometers from their objectives, struggling to regroup. Kesselring's staff viewed these reports with satisfaction. Allied planning appeared flawed. Airborne units were disorganized. This, Kesselring believed, was his opening. Every amphibious operation shared the same weakness. The first 24 hours. Before heavy weapons came ashore. Before defensive lines hardened. If armored forces attacked now, they could split the beachheads, isolate landing zones, and drive the invaders back into the water. Kesselring had seen it happen before. At Dieppe in 1942, Allied forces had been annihilated on the beaches in less than 10 hours. The order was given. The Hermann Göring Division would attack at dawn. This division represented the pinnacle of German military doctrine. Rebuilt in 1942 into a first-rate Panzer formation, its soldiers were fanatically loyal, its officers veterans of the Eastern Front. Training emphasized speed, aggression, and tactical flexibility. Most importantly, the division was equipped with Germany's most feared weapon, the Tiger tank. To Kesselring, this was the decisive instrument that would crush the American landing before it could survive its first day. The Panzerkampfwagen 6-second Tiger was nearly unstoppable in 1943. Its frontal armor measured 100 millimeters thick, immune to Allied tank guns at combat range. Its 88mm main gun could destroy any Allied tank from over 2 kilometers away. In experienced hands, a single Tiger could dominate an entire battlefield. 17 of these tanks spearheaded the advance toward Gela on the morning of July 11th. Behind them rolled Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, infantry in armored half-tracks, and supporting artillery units. More than 4,000 men and over 200 vehicles moved south across the Gela plain. The terrain favored armor, flat farmland, open roads, and clear lines of advance. American defenses extended only a few kilometers inland. Most of their tanks were still aboard transport ships. Their artillery batteries were being assembled, but were not yet operational. Infantry units possessed little capable of stopping heavy German armor. To German commanders, the conditions for a successful counterattack appeared nearly perfect. The Tigers would reach the American perimeter within hours. At 6:15 a.m., German columns began advancing. By 8:30, forward units engaged American positions outside Gela. Tiger tanks opened fire at long range, destroying foxholes and machine gun nests. American infantry fell back toward the beaches. Anti-tank rounds struck German armor and bounced away harmlessly. For 90 minutes, the counterattack unfolded exactly as German doctrine predicted. The advance was steady. Resistance weakened. The sea seemed within reach. From Frascati, Kessler received reports that confirmed his expectations. Victory appeared close. Then, at 9:10 a.m., the battle changed completely. At 9:10 a.m., USS Boise received firing coordinates from American shore fire control teams. Naval liaison officers embedded with infantry units had been tracking the German advance and relaying precise positions by radio. Aboard the cruiser, mechanical fire control computers calculated range and bearing. Guns elevated. Turrets aligned. Moments later, the first salvo erupted. The sound rolled across the Mediterranean like distant thunder. The shells did not arc visibly overhead. They disappeared into the sky, racing inland toward targets the German commanders could not see and did not yet understand. 43 seconds later, the shells landed among the advancing columns. High explosive rounds weighing nearly 50 kilograms detonated without warning. There was no whistle of incoming artillery, no visible enemy batteries. Only sudden, violent explosions tearing into tanks, vehicles, and marching infantry. This was naval ordnance designed to penetrate warship armor, now falling from a clear sky onto ground forces. German crews had trained for artillery fire and air attack. They had never trained for this. There was no instinctive response, no immediate way to fight back. Minutes later, USS Savannah joined the bombardment. Her 15 main guns added another 100 rounds per minute to the attack. Destroyers followed, their rapid-firing guns blanketing roads and assembly areas. Together, the American ships formed a floating artillery platform unlike anything in military history. Cruisers could deliver more firepower than entire army regiments. Destroyers filled gaps with relentless steel. The Hermann Göring Division had advanced into a kill zone extending nearly 30 kilometers inland, far beyond anything German planners had anticipated. Tiger tanks began to burn across the Gela plain, not because their armor was pierced directly, but because explosions shattered tracks, disabled suspensions, and ignited fuel and ammunition vehicles nearby. Near misses were enough. Shockwaves injured crews inside sealed hulls. Fragments killed exposed commanders. Immobilized Tigers became helpless targets as shell after shell detonated around them. Vehicles designed to dominate land battles were rendered useless by weapons fired from ships they could not see, reach, or silence. By 10 a.m., 6 Tiger tanks were destroyed, disabled, or abandoned. Not to American armor, not to anti-tank guns, to naval gunfire. Reports reaching Kessler's headquarters were confused and contradictory. Some officers believed they were under massive air attack. Others spoke of artillery with impossible range and caliber. The reality was worse than any explanation offered. His elite Panzer division was being annihilated by warships firing from beyond the horizon. This was not how modern warfare was supposed to function. Ships bombarded coastlines during landings. Everyone understood that. They protected beaches while troops came ashore, but ships did not engage maneuvering armored divisions deep inland. The accuracy required, the volume of fire, the ability to sustain bombardment against moving targets, it defied every assumption of military doctrine. Yet, that was exactly what was happening on the Gela Plain as American naval guns systematically dismantled a German counterattack. Between 9:10 and 11:02 a.m., Allied ships fired 3,766 shells at German positions. That single morning exceeded the artillery support many German divisions received in an entire month on the Eastern Front. And the ships could continue firing indefinitely. Ammunition vessels waited offshore with tens of thousands of additional rounds. This was not merely superior firepower, it was industrial capacity converted directly into battlefield dominance, operating without meaningful limitation. At 11 a.m., the commander of the Hermann Göring Division ordered a withdrawal. The counterattack had not failed gradually. It had been shattered. 10 of the division's 17 Tiger tanks were gone. Hundreds of soldiers lay dead or wounded across the plain. Survivors retreated into the hills northwest of Gela. Beyond the effective range of naval guns, the American beachhead was secure. The counterattack that should have thrown the invasion into the sea had ceased to exist. From Frascati, Kessler began to understand what had happened with chilling clarity. The Americans had solved the fundamental problem of amphibious warfare. Landing forces were always vulnerable in their first hours. Every military academy taught this. Every commander planned to exploit it. Strike the enemy while he is half-landed, half-organized, and force him back into the sea. But the Americans had eliminated the vulnerability entirely by turning their ships into mobile artillery. A single cruiser offshore could deliver more firepower than an entire Army artillery regiment. It could do so within minutes of receiving targeting coordinates. It could fire for hours without concern for resupply. It could reposition faster than any ground battery. And unlike artillery, it could not be captured, flanked, or destroyed by a ground counterattack. This was not a tactical adjustment. It was an industrial revolution applied directly to warfare. Building cruisers like Boise and Savannah required shipyard capacity Germany simply did not possess. Manning them required trained naval crews developed over years. Supplying them with ammunition demanded manufacturing output on a scale the Axis powers could never match. The shells falling on the Hermann Göring Division represented not just firepower, but an entire economic system mobilized for total war. Germany was no longer fighting an army. It was fighting production itself. The destruction of the Hermann Göring Division at Gela marked a turning point in the campaign for Sicily. Although the fighting would continue for weeks, the outcome was already decided. Without the ability to mount successful armored counterattacks against the beachheads, German forces lost the initiative entirely. Kessler could no longer strike decisively. He could only delay. His remaining units began a fighting withdrawal toward the northeastern corner of the island, conceding ground step by step under constant Allied pressure. The Hermann Göring Division never recovered its offensive capability. Its remaining Tiger tanks were committed piecemeal, used defensively rather than concentrated for decisive action. Every attempt to mass armor near the coast drew immediate naval bombardment. Any German force that paused to organize became a target for floating artillery. Positions that might have been defensible against infantry or tanks became untenable once naval guns opened fire. The American and British advance across Sicily became relentless, methodical, and unstoppable. Throughout July and early August 1943, Allied forces pushed steadily inland. Their flanks remained protected by naval guns capable of reaching deep into the island. Cruisers and destroyers followed the advance along the coastline, repositioning as needed to maintain coverage. German commanders learned quickly that proximity to the sea now meant vulnerability. Counterattacks were abandoned before they could be launched. Defensive lines dissolved under bombardment. The sea itself had become an extension of the battlefield. Palermo, the Sicilian capital, fell on July 22nd. German resistance collapsed faster than expected as naval firepower neutralized key defensive positions. Supply routes were disrupted. Assembly areas were shattered before attacks could begin. The psychological effect was profound. German troops understood that no concentration of force near the coast could remain hidden for long. American and British forces advanced with growing confidence, supported by an invisible shield of steel offshore. On the eastern coast, Catania fell on Fiji, August 5th. After heavy fighting, German units attempted delaying actions but were repeatedly forced back. Naval guns reached inland valleys and road networks, breaking up troop movements before they could solidify. Any German effort to regain momentum was smothered almost immediately. What had begun as a conventional land campaign had evolved into something entirely new, shaped decisively by industrial-scale naval firepower. The final objective was Messina, at Sicily's northeastern tip, just 3 kilometers from the Italian mainland. By mid-August, Allied forces closed in from multiple directions. German commanders recognized that holding the city was impossible. Yet Kessler managed one final achievement amid the disaster. Operation Lehrgang, Truth. The evacuation across the Strait of Messina was organized under constant Allied air attack. Ferries, barges, and small craft moved troops night after night. Between August 11th and August 17th, over 100,000 German and Italian soldiers were successfully evacuated to the mainland. Heavy equipment was largely abandoned, but the army itself escaped destruction. Kessler had saved his forces, but he could not save Sicily. The island fell on August 17, 1943, marking the complete collapse of Axis control in the central Mediterranean. The strategic balance had shifted permanently. The lessons learned at Gela did not remain confined to Sicily. They would repeat across the Mediterranean and beyond. At Salerno, in September 1943, German counterattacks against Allied landings were again shattered by naval bombardment. Panzer divisions attempting to drive beachheads into the sea encountered the same wall of steel. Ships firing from offshore destroyed armored concentrations before they could reach decisive positions. At Anzio, in January 1944, Allied forces established a beachhead south of Rome. German attempts to contain and eliminate it met overwhelming naval fire. USS Brooklyn alone fired over 4,300 tons main battery rounds during a single month of combat support. Entire German attacks were broken apart before they could fully form. What had shocked Kessler in Sicily became grimly familiar to German commanders across Italy. The pattern reached its culmination at Normandy in June 1944. The largest amphibious operation in history was protected by an immense naval task force. German armored reserves attempting to counterattack on D-Day encountered the same fate as the Hermann Göring Division. The 21st Panzer Division, moving toward the beaches, was shattered by naval gunfire before it could strike decisively. The lesson of Gela had been learned and applied on an even greater scale. Kessler spent the remainder of the war fighting defensive campaigns in Italy. He constructed the Gustav Line across the peninsula and held Monte Cassino for 5 months against repeated Allied assaults. German troops fought with skill and determination, extracting a high cost in blood and time, but Kessler never again attempted to throw an amphibious landing back into the sea. He understood the mathematics were no longer in Germany's favor. The war continued for nearly 2 more years after Sicily. Millions more soldiers and civilians would die. The Nazi regime would fight to the bitter end. Yet, for Kessler, watching his elite Panzer division destroyed by ships firing from beyond the horizon on July 11, 1943, the final outcome was already becoming clear. Germany was not fighting an army. Germany was fighting a production system. That system could build cruisers faster than Germany could build tanks. It could manufacture shells faster than Germany could train soldiers. It could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. Production systems do not tire. They do not panic. They do not lose their nerve. They simply continue producing until the enemy has nothing left to fight with. The burning Tiger tanks on the Gela Plain were not just a battlefield loss. They were a glimpse of Germany's future.